Hi, everyone. My name is Dylan. I'm a research analyst at Messari. Today's topic is Bitcoin L2s on the rise. I'll let our panelists introduce themselves, starting with Gabe.
Everyone, my name is Gabe Parker. I do research at Galaxy, and I mostly cover all things Bitcoin. So Bitcoin L2s, ordinals, BIPs, you name it.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Reckhow. I'm the COO at Thesis, which is a Bitcoin venture studio. We've done Fold, TBTC and the Threshold network, and now we're focusing on Mezzo, a Bitcoin L2, and Acre, a staking project on Bitcoin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Muneeb. I'm the founder of Stacks. It's Bitcoin L2.
Great. So we're going to begin just asking, why do we need Bitcoin Layer 2s? We obviously have very advanced and developed smart contract platforms in Ethereum and Solana. Why invest so much resources into developing the Bitcoin L2 layer system and technology? We'll start with Muneeb.
Yeah, I think the way to think about this is Bitcoin is the largest chain, the largest asset, digital asset out there. And we know for a fact that Bitcoin is never going to reach 1 billion people on the L1, right? So for any scalability discussion that comes for Bitcoin, there's only one path, like that's the L2s, like, be it Lightning, be it Stacks, be it something else. So we absolutely have to build the Bitcoin L2s to take Bitcoin mainstream, so to speak. That's like the base case, right? And then the second part of that, which is actually in some ways even more important, is that right now Bitcoin is not productive. Like for very good reason, the L1 is very simple, very durable. There's not much you can do there, but you can program Bitcoin on the L2s. So in some ways, like, just like Ethereum needed L2s for scalability, Bitcoin actually needs it more because it not only needs it for scalability, it actually needs it for programmability as well, which is something that, Ethereum you can program on the L1, but Bitcoin you can't.
Yeah. Totally agree. Bitcoin is and probably always will be like the daddy of crypto assets. So I think, it's almost kind of silly to ask, like, is there a need? Because I think that we've already seen that need. If you think about the end of last year with the ordinals boom, like people want to do stuff with their Bitcoin. It's a lot of people. I think I saw in your talk yesterday that the ordinals boom made like Bitcoin the second most like money spent on transactions next to Ethereum. And to me, that says like, all right, it's time to scale. That is not going to work long term, bringing the next billion people on.
Yeah, all great points. I think one problem we have right now with Bitcoin DeFi is that most of this DeFi is on Ethereum, right? Like there's about $8 billion of wrapped Bitcoin locked in smart contracts on Ethereum. And I'm truly of the belief that this is not end game, right? Like Bitcoin DeFi should be within the Bitcoin ecosystem. I don't think it's right to assume that, we'll just take into account the trust assumptions of having wrapped Bitcoin on Ethereum and call it a day. I think there is a large set of Bitcoin holders that are more willing to use DeFi products if it's within the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Great. On the point of DeFi on Bitcoin, we've obviously had a few years to see how DeFi has evolved on Ethereum. Could you guys kind of shed some light on what architecture or tools or ideas that Bitcoin's incorporating from Ethereum or other L1 DeFi ecosystems, and also what they've learned to avoid?
So I think one thing that's clear that we've learned from the Ethereum DeFi ecosystem is you need to have a liquid stablecoin ecosystem. Like that is like necessary. Like without that, it's really hard to build a robust DeFi ecosystem. And I think it's clear when looking at wrapped Bitcoin, right, on Ethereum, about 75% of wrapped Bitcoin is deposited on lending and borrowing protocols, and just to borrow stablecoins simply, right? So I think, wrapped Bitcoin's a great case study to show that, okay, there's this set of Bitcoin DeFi users that just really want to borrow stablecoins, right? But one thing I just want to make clear is that for Bitcoin DeFi and L2s, like we don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? Like MakerDAO, Aave, Uniswap are all great products. They've found product market fit. They're battle tested. So the next move is just bringing that over to Bitcoin, keeping it within Bitcoin, made in Bitcoin.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree that focusing on product market fit is really important. It's something that we can definitely take from what happened with DeFi and with Ethereum 2020. It's interesting looking back. I've been building in this space for like 10 years, like Muneeb as well. Like throughout that DeFi summer, I feel like there was a lot of speculation, there was a lot of excitement, but it was such a smaller group of people, right? They were still experimenting, they still learned a lot. Now we're in a different era. We're staking. The economic value of crypto is not so much about speculation anymore. It's proven. Project like yours and Babylon, love what they're doing. But I think that has brought a ton of new entrants into this Bitcoin L2 and Bitcoin DeFi scene. I think we're going to see a lot of them burn out. But yeah, back to, product market fit. That is one of the biggest lessons that we can take from the Ethereum DeFi scene. What we've learned at Thesis is, we've noticed that, ordinals users, right? Those are people that came from Ethereum and Solana, right? We know from our work with Fold, Bitcoin Rewards credit card, that people, they don't want to spend their Bitcoin, but they want to do cool things with it. They want to earn with it. I think trying to build for that use case of how to allow for people to do interesting things with their Bitcoin, be their own bank. I think Bitcoin Fi is really poised to take some of those early successes from the DeFi ecosystem like Aave and take that to the next level.
I do think the Bitcoin culture is a little bit different, right? So people in Bitcoin are going to have their own sort of remix on stuff. Like ordinals in some ways, yes, there are NFTs, but they're also kind of not, right? Like they're the Bitcoin version of or their own remix there. And I do think that one thing that is sort of fundamentally a little bit different is that the Bitcoin holders, they value their Bitcoin a lot, right? So losses in DeFi, if you're in a very high risk system where people's risk tolerance is very, very high, because let's say they're trading on leverage or they are lose with using their capital anyway, when losses happen, pain is also less because you were operating in a very high risk environment and people sort of knew what they signed up for. So I think in Bitcoin, I do think there's a cultural difference that people really value their Bitcoin. So losing a lot of Bitcoin in DeFi hacks is actually going to be much more painful. That's why I think there has been a bigger sort of focus on more precise programming languages like Clarity at Stacks or even practices where maybe slow and steady growth is more preferred versus, crash and burn, let's try to do something fast. So I do think there's these cultural differences that are probably going to show up, but you might see slightly different versions of the things that are working in other ecosystems, but implemented maybe in a more careful, precise way and with the more sustainable sort of growth strategies behind them.
Great. We've seen a lot of excitement on platforms like Ethereum and Solana about use cases like gaming, DePIN, social media. I was wondering if you see Bitcoin ever supporting those use cases in the future, or if DeFi is going to be the primary use case for Bitcoin Layer-2s. I'll start with Muneeb.
I think DeFi is sort of the most obvious thing, right? Right now, but the way to think about this is I almost view these chains as small islands, right? Bitcoin is by far Manhattan, the main thing. So if someone is doing experiments on a small scale and that experiment is interesting, at some point you can run that experiment at a large scale as well, right? So there's no, especially with the L2s, there's nothing you can program in Solana or Ethereum that you can't program on a Bitcoin L2, right? There's no sort of you can, I'm sure someone will bring SVM as a Bitcoin L2 as well, right? There's a market now, there are 50 plus projects, most of them are EVM. So the technical capabilities would obviously be there, But the question is more of like, is there, when you bring something to Bitcoin, it's like sort of like bringing it to the main stage, right? So is it, the question is there broad demand for that? So with stable coins, with, as Gabe was mentioning that, just borrowing stable coins, has shown great product market fit. That's something when you bring it to Bitcoin, I do expect it to show a lot of use, right? But some of the smaller experiments, I think the question really is that, are they sustainable? Are they going to show demand when you bring them to the main stage? If those things are true, then I expect those things to come to Bitcoin in the future.
Yeah, I totally agree that, use cases that we're seeing on other chains, it's going to be possible to do them on Bitcoin. I do think I agree also with your point about culture being a little bit different. So one of the things that we think is true about use cases is that, like, the chain that's the most fun, right, often wins, right? We're seeing that right now with Solana, meme coins, like SocialFi, Friend.tech. And I think Bitcoin, though, when we get to that point where people are building fun, unique things, it's like a different cultural flavor. I don't know if you guys remember Poyo Feed, but stuff like that. I think we're going to see some gaming and some silly things like that. But I do also think Bitcoin Fi is where it's going to be at. It's going to come back to like, how do we make Bitcoin, increase the velocity and make it something that is it's more usable to your average people. Right now, though, the challenge is to just like get over the only use case that is out there right now is like points and points farming. So I think we'll move past that soon, but right now that's all we got.
So for Bitcoin L2s, I think, of course, it's great if we can bring everything over, right? Gaming, DePIN, et cetera, right? Outside of DeFi. But I'm kind of the belief that DePIN will stay in Solana. Gaming will stay on other high throughput chains. What Bitcoin L2s need to think about more, it's like, what do your initial users want to do with their Bitcoin, right? And something I always think about as well, and from an application perspective, is that if you're an L2 inheriting Bitcoin L1 security, what kind of application will actually need that security? Obviously, DeFi is one, right? But I don't think some shooting game or, needs Bitcoin L1 security, right? So, but, last thing I want to say is that the killer use case on these Bitcoin L2s, I think, is something that we don't even really know yet. I think Bitcoin L2s have a great opportunity to think bigger and outside the box. So one thing I think about is like identity verification, right? We haven't really seen much of that pop off yet. But those bigger ideas, I think, is what's going to come to Bitcoin L2s, because we do have the talent, the developer talent, the mind share. So I think at that point, anything's possible.
I want to turn the conversation to Bitcoin, the asset. So I think historically Bitcoin's been valued primarily as a store of value. What are your thoughts on Bitcoin L2s and expanded Bitcoin DeFi, expanding Bitcoin's use case as a medium of exchange, or kind of changing the role of Bitcoin, Bitcoin's economic value?
Yeah. I think Bitcoin will always be digital gold forever. But, with ordinals, I think what we learned is that, okay, Bitcoin is digital gold, and it's, a platform where you can express yourself and build digital assets. So, we're going to see this phase of the narrative stack growing. And with Bitcoin L2 specifically, once you can onboard, good DeFi apps and you can actually generate meaningful yield for Bitcoin, now Bitcoin becomes probably the best yield generating commodity in the world, but it'll always be digital gold. It's just adding to the narrative stack.
Yeah. Seconding all of that, the way that we think about it. And I do think that the Bitcoin Zeitgeist is moving in this direction. It's this concept of you can be a monetary maximalist, right? I think I've heard you talk about this as well, as the idea that Bitcoin is always going to be digital gold, right? You can believe in it as sound money, believe in the 21 million, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be also working to expand the capabilities of Bitcoin. I think things like the ETF, right, have brought in a lot of, fresh minds into the space, and people are like, okay, Bitcoin, I get it, I'm in. Now what can I do, right? These people are coming from more of the traditional finance background, and they want to know, how can I put it to work? And sort of the old way of thinking that was a lot more like rigid and almost like religious about sound money. I think we're going to probably be saying goodbye to that.
Yeah, so I do think that Bitcoin's primary use case is like almost like savings technology, right? Like you think of that as like cold storage. Most Bitcoin is going to end up in some sort of cold storage, right? Like ETFs are in a way cold storage, right? Like you're just racking up Bitcoin. My personal savings is cold storage, right? Like that's where I keep my Bitcoin. But I do think there's a hot wallet use case for BTC that's at least very interesting to me. Like if you look at the Lightning community, like it's very passionate. They've tried using Bitcoin for payments on Lightning in all sorts of ways. And it's a pretty large community with developers and passionate people who run their own nodes. I do think Lightning has certain limitations as technology. So now when there are hundreds of experiments happening with other L2s, I'm pretty sure we'll solve the problem. Like our Nakamoto release of Stacks solves this problem of reliable, fast BTC payments that will work every time you do it at any scale, right? You want to send 10 million, you want to send 100 million in BTC, it will go through, just attach a small amount of fee. So I do think we'll start seeing use cases where they were just technically not possible before. People tried it, they were excited about them, but the technology just wasn't there. Like even, you saw pay with Bitcoin buttons on websites, but the web wallets weren't really there. Like it was a very clunky experience to try and pay and wait for 20 minutes. Versus if you can have almost Solana-like UX experience, there's a good web wallet, you just click and low fee payment just goes through. So I think one of those old people who hasn't fully given up on those use cases yet. I just think our technology stack wasn't there. And Bitcoin L2s had to mature a lot for some of this to happen. So we'll see how it happens. But I agree that the primary use case will remain sort of like holding Bitcoin. But I think the hot wallet use cases is where I get more excited.
Well, let's finish up asking about kind of the timeline for building out these Bitcoin layer 2 ecosystems. Obviously, there's a lot of technical challenges. Other technologies, alt L1s, are moving fast. What are the largest challenges to overcome for Bitcoin L2s, and what's kind of the timeline that you see for overcoming those?
I feel like a lot of the L2s, they aren't live yet, right? Like Nakamoto is almost there, it's not live yet. SBTC is not live yet. So I think we're at the early stage of like infra development in L2. And these things usually happen in like boom and bust cycles, right? So we have seen this happen in other ecosystems. Just like ETH L2s at some point, there was a ton of interest, ton of funding, and they grew to like a 80, 90 billion market cap. I think Bitcoin L2s are a very, very early stage. And they will get overhyped, there will be some sort of a correction. But at some point, you'll start getting, really good infrastructure that actually works. And I don't think we're there yet, right? Like that's sort of like the first thing. One last thought I want to leave people with is Coinbase, a single company, is sitting on like 10% of BTC supply. If Bitcoin is heading towards like, anywhere between $5 to $10 trillion asset, I do think there will be some L2s that cross Coinbase in terms of the amount of BTC that is issued there. That's a huge market. That's like potentially $500 billion to $1 trillion of BTC being issued on these permissionless L2s. And I think a lot of developers would actually come after that market because this is something that I almost see happening in the next 4 to 5 years.
Yeah. Would love to see that happen. Challenges, you can talk about the technical side and then like the business market side. On the technical side, like BitVM is getting pretty close. Be exciting to see that next year. OpCat is another thing where, as a technologist, I love OpCat, but as a business person first, I don't really put all my eggs in that basket. And I don't think that's necessarily the, smartest way to be thinking about building a Bitcoin L2. And then I guess the last thing I'll say on the business side is I do think that we have almost like a psychological hurdle with Bitcoin L2s right now, where the market is just seeing it as this like points game, right? There aren't real use cases that people can point to right now. And that's something that we're focusing on with Mezzo, is really thinking about how can we make Bitcoin super normal, right? For your grandma, your average person to be able to access decentralized financial services, like, getting a mortgage or savings, loans, any of that stuff.
So I'll be quick because I know we're out of time. In terms of timing, right, I think a lot of the exciting Bitcoin L2s are going to launch mainnet around Q1 25. Like, for example, like Citria just launched their testnet last week. They're kind of aiming for around that time. So, like, be on the lookout for Q1 25. In terms of the problems, the technical problems they've covered, that's completely true, right? Like, we don't know when we're going to get OpCat, right, or OpCTV. But I think the biggest challenge is more of this like culture challenge of like, how do you convince a Bitcoin OG to take their Bitcoin out of a hardware wallet and bridge it over to this new Bitcoin L2 and use it on chain for DeFi, right? Like, I'm of the belief that there actually is a sizable demographic of Bitcoin holders that just won't touch Bitcoin L2s, and that's fine, right? But the users or the Bitcoin holders in between the super maxi OGs and like rat Bitcoin users, like that middle is going to be, the challenge for, I guess, 2025, right? Like convincing them to actually go on chain, right? And use an L2 for the first time. So yeah, I think that's the biggest problem.
Gotcha. Okay, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.